Yes. Sharing with Deputy Seeley Reyes, both of them, and Deputy Harty and Deputy Michael Collins. I'm happy to contribute briefly tonight on the measures provided for this non-event today, Budget 2020. Minister Donohoe framed his budget earlier today as having two strands. First one was in providing the extra steps we need to take into context of a no-deal Brexit, and the second revolved around improving public services. Well, I think he failed miserably to do either. The Minister also began his statement by saying, and you have to hear this to believe it, that we have a well-run economy, with government delivering a responsible management of the economy. I don't know what planet he's on, or he thinks the people are on. This highlights the absolute fantasy land that Minister and his colleagues are living in. Total fantasy. Does he think we can simply ignore the catastrophic explosion of costs associated with the diabolical project of the National Children's Hospital, which now stands at nearly €2 billion and growing? That's all it's growing as a price, because the hospital is no sign of it to be seen out of the ground, and it will never be finished, and it will never take a child from any of us in rural independence families or grandchildren because they can't get access to it. Does he think that we can just ignore the expected rise in delivery of the National Broadband Plan? Even the Taoiseach has said recently that he welcomes the possibility of an inquiry by the Oireachtas Communication Committee into the National Broadband Plan. Is he for real? He's the Taoiseach in charge of this, and he's hoping there'll be an Oireachtas inquiry, another investigation, and maybe a tribunal, and he'll be riding off into some big job in Europe or someplace out with Big Phil, the enforcer. In fact, we know that at least €1.5 billion has to be found from the National Development Plan, and that is in addition to the €800 million already allocated to the National Broadband Plan. And the people who I represent in Tipperary, from Moneygall right down to Carrick-on-Suir and across from Ballyporeen across to Ballingarry, they don't have broadband. It might be 4 poles away or 200 metres away, but it might as well be in Mongolia as be there. They have none. Is this what the Minister means when he talks about a responsible running of the economy? Kindergarten children wouldn't put that into their speech, because totally irresponsible and reckless. The fact that this government's reputation for prudent economic management is in tatters. They used to have, your party, Fine Gael, used to have a record of fairly sound economic policies, but now it lies in tatters. Was it ever really deserved that reputation? I think not. Now that we can see that there was no effective constraints placed on the likes of the National Children's Hospital. The Minister also spoke today about the importance of carbon taxation and the measures to prevent it impacting on the poorest and most vulnerable. Yet he did nothing about it. As the Minister was on his feet, St Vincent de Paul was saying that while the plan to defer carbon tax increases until May 20, funny, well, the election probably in April 20, you think the people will be fooled completely. You'd pull the wool over their eyes again, but my God, their eyes are wide open now. They have the cataracts removed, thanks to the Hilly Ray buses and Michael Collins buses, most of them, and they know what's going on. They're no idiots. A €6 increase adds, on carbon tax adds 102 to a 60-litre petrol bill. 60 petrol bill, and 117 for diesel, and 144 per 40 kg a bag of coal, and 31% for the briquettes bill. It's an insult. The bale of briquettes is the smallest commodity people can buy, and you hit it like that. The poorer people, the marginalised people. But of course, Fine Gael were never very interested in those people. This is a regressive tax that must be urgently reconsidered, Minister. There is simply not enough attention provided to how this is going to hurt the most vulnerable. I would also like to remind the Minister and this government that carbon tax has already been in existence since 2010. You think, hey presto, because of the lads outside in the front gate and the back gate and the Extinction Rebellion, that you have this new tax. It's there since 2010. We've been bled with it. This tax, as we know, applies to certain fuels that we burn for heating, natural gas and heating oil, and for transfer purposes, petrol and diesel, which we all have to suffer and endure and need to exist in rural Ireland. In fact, since it was introduced in 2010, Minister, the state has already taken at least €2.8 billion in carbon tax, I'll have you know, and have to be sure the public know it, and they know because they feel it in their pocket every week. In light of that argument, an argument could have been certainly made that we are already contributing massive amounts of tax when it comes to carbon-generating activities. Every person in Ireland who puts petrol in their car or lights their cooker or is in some measure already paying through the nose to offset damage done by carbon tax to the tune of €400 million each year. The impression I get is that the government wants us to forget about this. Just forget about this and to start seeing the climate carbon tax as something new, when in reality we've been paying it for almost a decade, Minister. So you're not fooling the people. So, although we have already given the government almost €3 billion, we are still being treated as ecologically irresponsible and not contributing our fair share, which is more disturbing. People may well ask, what right have they to expect that additional taxes can be justified, given the obvious failures of the existing carbon tax to implement new and effective strategies around climate change? The Climate Change Advisory Council has pointed to the need for an increase in carbon tax, and the Government's Climate Action Plan commits to implementation of a carbon tax rate of at least €80 per tonne by 2020. God help us. This will have a devastating impact on many sectors of our economy, I'll have you know. However, as Parliamentary Budget Office has noted, an important aspect of the increasing carbon pricing is the role of the complementary supports to assist the increased burden on households on a low income, who generally spend a higher proportion of their income on energy. And I'm talking about city and town dwellers as well, not all rural, the marginalised people. The PBO go on to note that research from the ESRI shows that low-income households can be compensated for increases in the carbon tax. All fine in paper. Different compensation schemes include lump sum rebates, revenues and recycling through the existing tax and welfare systems. We need to see far more detail on these proposals, especially as the impact on the hauliers, who are not at all happy, the road hauliers. And you have your candidate now. She did great work as a road haulier, Verona, and I don't know what she thinks she is this evening. Will she be very happy with it? It's only a cobbler's job he done with it. Changing around bans and changing around permissions and things that we don't understand. They understand it because they know the price of it and the impact it's going to have on a most vital sector, especially facing Brexit. As we know, auto diesel accounts for 42% of carbon tax receipts. I was glad to hear the Minister commit to introducing a benefit in kind for commercial vehicles and additional rebate for relief for hauliers. But as I said, it's very convoluted and very strange and won't make them any better position than they were. The haulage industry is a vital part of the maintenance of our economy and has suffered serious setbacks in recent years. The increase in carbon tax for diesel must be balanced out with other supporting measures for this industry, or we will see collapse of the sector, and God help us then. The Taoiseach told me some months ago, when I asked him these questions, he said they should get smaller vehicles. Just think about it. Smaller vehicles. That's some logic. Minister Dunster also said today that the government, as a government, we stand ready to act. For a brief moment there, I thought we stand ready to act. And you're better at acting than you're acting, but you're good actors too, but not acting in favour of the people. Because that is what this government has been doing, taking the financial quality of life away from the rural people of rural Ireland, and indeed urban Ireland, taking the axe to it, and to hell out the Connacht, Cromwell's old adage, you never, ever looked after the Nina Bioge, the little people. They are the ones being left to carry the burden of disproportionate and unfair manner. Minister Dunham says he is providing €42 million in rescue and restructuring fund with respect to agri-food sector, €85 million for beef farmers, €14 million for fisheries. Couldn't look after one harbour and a couple of piers, €6 million for livestock farmers and mushroom sector, €5 million for food and drinks. All sounds fine and dandy, but the beef sector, it's on its knees. And he had paid him some respect last week when he was supposed to have an independent chair. He appointed an insider, former Secretary General of the Department, who brought up most of the rules that the farmers are trying to get rid of. You should be ashamed of yourself putting him in there. Nothing personal against the man, but we needed someone independent, with an independent mind. As I said, of course we welcome all this, but it falls far short. The beef sector alone is a multi-billion-euro industry, and it has been undermined completely through the inaction and lethargic effect of this government, and indeed Minister Creed. We hear rumours now that he might be retiring. Well, he may retire, because he's no damn good in the job anyway, and no good to the farmers of rural Ireland. We know this for a fact, because as our own rural motion stated here recently, only 2 weeks ago, key commitments outlined in the programme for partnership government, which we fought hard to have included, were never acted upon. And I lay that at the blame of the officials, because you're not doing it and you're not insisting that the officials do it. The permanent government are in charge here. You're just photo opportunity merchants and spin machines. Those commitments included introducing a framework for producer organisations, POs, and development of POs in the beef sector to ensure farmers are not just price takers but price makers. And we're having a task force now that hasn't populated yet, and he appoints one of the usual suspects to chair that. Independent I won't repeat it here to the Count Holder. Yet the fact remains that there was literally zero progress on those commitments from the department side. The Department of Agriculture I'm talking about. Indeed, it was a lack of leadership from the department that created so much of the mess farmers found themselves in and continue to find themselves in. We also heard about the €650 million package in the event of a no-deal Brexit for areas like tourism or these regions are the regions most affected. Again, that is welcome. But the hard fact remains, Minister, that the regions outside Dublin have been operating according to a two-tier economic model for years now. So it's nothing new. For years it's happening. This government has allowed that model to continue, and that is the one of the key reasons the rural Ireland still stands and needs for such supports. In the programme for government, which we had a big part in negotiating, we were promised rural proofing of all legislation. You must have lost the book the day you went into government because you didn't rural proof any piece of legislation. Nothing. The Minister said the budget was a bridge to the better economy. Imagine a bridge. I wouldn't like to be going over that bridge. Again, I think it's a bridge to nowhere, or might be more appropriate than a bridge to somewhere. Where, for example, is there any sense that the housing emergency in front of us, front and centre? You barely mentioned it. The housing crisis, you just want to talk away about it. Ask Social Justice Ireland, ask Mattie McGrath, don't ask anyone, just walk down the streets of your own towns. The Minister essentially covered up the issue in a paragraph and only then with reference to the Residential Tenancy Board funding, which I welcome, but this paltry amount. To think that a budget with so many people in the housing crisis and young children and all, and you could just mention it in a paragraph. That is good. That's the Housing Tenancy Board, support and support, but it is so woefully lacking in imagination and ambition that I think people in housing emergency will just despair. What else will they do in despair? Here is what Respond had to say about the Minister's State treatment to help us to help the buy scheme. Continuation of the Help to Buy scheme in its current form will only benefit high-income earners. Low and middle-income earners are not in the picture again, unfortunately, but you don't care about them. Never did. That is a damning assessment. As Minister, it highlights yet again how the poorest and most vulnerable are being targeted by this Dublin-centric and out-of-touch government. Totally Dublin-centric and rich-centric and well-off-centric, and to hell with the Nadine Nebioga, to hell with the poor. Minister Donoghue also mentioned a €1 billion package of measures for businesses and SMEs. Again, this is welcome, but it totally avoids one of the root costs that cripple SMEs and all over state every day of the week, namely that is rates. Killing, and nothing for them, because one time you did the rates, you got your sewers and you got this house grit and you got a bag of salt if there was a nice. You got absolutely sweet FA from for the rates now. Only pay them and shut up. Nothing. They're a penal rate of tax, and we look forward to some revaluations recently, and we got it. What did we get? Filling stations and petrol outlets being nearly crippled with multiple increases in the rates. We need to see rapid introduction of measures that will provide greater charging flexibility on the issue of local authorities, and it's not there. In terms of the health, the Minister said he is introducing medical cards for underage and others, which will benefit 56,000 citizens. I hope that he consulted the GP's bodies about this, because I know he didn't, because when he introduced the free under sixes card as introduced, the NAGP warned that it would lead to major capacity issues and create significant amounts of additional stress for GPs. Dr. Hartley, he knows all about it. Will GPs be provided with parallel levels of support to enable them to implement this policy? No. Just, it looks grand and it's great, and clog up the surgeries and let them wait, let them eat cake. That's what you're saying, Minister Donoghue and Taoiseach Varadkar. The same for the carers, and they propose to introduce 1 million additional home help hours. Where is the recruitment process for this, Minister? When will it begin? You might as well introduce 10 million hours, because there's an embargo on recruiting any new carers. These wonderful people who get up here in the morning and maybe go to 7 or 8 different households, half an hour here, half an hour there, but they are committed and working strenuously. And the sickest of people now being released from hospital, cancer patients, you name it, cannot get any home care packages because there's a ban on recruitment. Full and square, so it's no point saying 1 million extra hours if you don't have the recruitment ban lifted. And also give us the figures of how many people have left the service because of stress and overwork, how many people are retired, and what are the numbers now, because it's a total con job, and you should be ashamed of yourself on that. And I salute the carers. And I salute Councillor Malloy Clonmel, the manager of South Tipperary Carers, and every carer. I come in here to lobby you. They might say, well, go out and knock me down for a walk, because they'll be lobbying you because you care nothing about them. Have you focused in the loss of those carers and home health assistants that have left the system, as I said? And if not, why not? But you haven't. You think you can fool us again with figures. Carers in my own county provide 250,000 hours of care per week. This breaks down to an average of 42.1 hours per carer per week. Staggering figure. You're talking now about a 4-day working week and a 39-hour week. You just think, you're total planet, I don't know what planet you're on. We need to see our carers supported by real concrete action like access to the emergency and other forms of respite. They do not need pie-in-the-sky commitments that are meaningless but good on budget day. A million extra hours sounds great. I think they'd all fall for it. The Minister also said he was bringing the education budget to €11 billion in 2020, an increase of €2 billion since 2016. Mix it up, why didn't go back to 1916? I mean, it goes back and you add up the figures, it sounds great. I hope this includes movement on the raising of the capitation grant, which is so badly needed, Minister. You know all the schools in South Kilkenny. To 200, at least it should be. Will the Minister also not accept that tens of millions of that budget goes on renting prefabs? Why in God's name that you can't sort out that once and for all? And you're an excellent prefab creation company and your own constituency, Minister. I found out through my own parliamentary questions that the department has paid in excess of 83 million just to cover costs of renting the units during the period 2011 to 2015. 83 million, staggering. And why are the officials and the managers in the department and the Minister, why aren't you able to sort this out? Ongoing, because anybody knows that we're educating the prefab, and I was myself, they're not suitable for giving education and tuition. They're like roast boxes in the summer and ice boxes in the winter. There can be no doubt that further tens of millions have disappeared from the health budget since then because of the cost of the education budget. While I welcome the efforts being made to decrease the amount of prefabs being used in our schools, I also find it extraordinary that we have essentially invested almost 100 million in keeping our children in what are often unsuitable, as I said, and poorly constructed accommodation. The figures given to me by the Minister do not even take account of the ancillary costs associated with maintaining the prefabs and the stick-up jobs and the patch jobs and for the Parents' Council have to fundraise for on a daily basis. What is clear, however, is that even according to the government's own figures, the needs for schools are not being met. Under the Department's prefab replacement initiatives, approval was given to just 217 schools, 209 primary and 8 post-primary, to replace 614 prefabs units with permanent accommodation. Of the total 217 approved schools projects, only 170 have been completed. So they're falling down, they're leaking, they're broken, they're dangerous. I simply cannot accept that it's beyond the wit of the government to draw up an intensive school building programme that would serve not only to improve class conditions, but which also lead to an employment in the building sector, which you seem to be hell-bent against. Giving procurement priority to local firms would also help the local economy and school area. And also the Primary Principals Association, they're killed with regulations and they need a break. And I want to support them and they need time because they've been destroyed with fatigue and pressure. 40 different directives issued on them last year and I expect to be abreast of all of them as well as teaching. We need to recognise Mona Noyag's Chucky Sheet, the very young, from the cradle to the grave we should look after, Minister, but you're forgetting most of them. As I said, we must remember that these children and teachers are already operating against the backdrop of school environment where our average class size at primary levels is 3 pupils higher than the OECD average, as well as being above the OECD average in relation to pupil-teacher ratio. You did nothing there either, Minister. Minister, my focus score. The stamp duty is a disaster for farmers. It's a disaster for anyone struggling to buy back their home, because they must form one of these companies now to try and meet the banks and get their home back from the vulture funds. Minister, now your predecessor said the vultures funds were necessary in Ireland. I know what vultures are when sheep are lambing, when they take the eyes out the heads of the lambs before they're born. You should know what a horrible connotation to say, but you'll find out when you go to the people of the merciless way you treated them. And you'll have no shame, but you'll have no place to hide. And the wolves will come after them, and Ryan wants to implement into rural Ireland. Imagine wolves into rural Ireland. We're come into with deer. We're come into with fox. You won't let us hunt the hares, or you won't let us have greyhound racing. You're a Dublin cabal, a Dublin-centric government that care little about rural Ireland. Port fault or fault Ireland supposed to be promoting rural Ireland, and Minister Ross just got so fat he got that knows nothing. He wouldn't know the front end and the greyhound from the back end. They said we should stop the advertising. Imagine our tourist industry. A minister for tourism would stop promoting for visitors to go to greyhound racing, where you even have not live here at all. That'll tell you what he thinks of, and that'll tell you what. But he's the man then that got a new electric car. He can get him because he can well afford it. And we're all told to get him and have him, and he would charge an electric pint. He might as well put it into that biro. It was a dead. They wouldn't announce the current and it wouldn't light up flash lamp bulb for you. And he's trying to con the people. The conning is over. Your day is up. This is a wasted opportunity. Go on, Chuck, Dr.